Hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Frank RAUSAN PEREIRA. Well, the Indian peninsula is like none other, and our nation is called a subcontinent for a reason. The multifold of experiences that it provides. From islands to mountains, heritage sites to wildlife sanctuaries, beaches to palaces, adventure sports to religious abodes, and from leisure to medical tourism, we have it all. The fundamentals are all there, but what more needs to be done? What is the state of tourism in India and how do we realize its full potential? That's what we're going to discuss today. Joining me on the program are PUNEET CHHATWAL, MD and CEO, Taj Hotels, Resorts and Palaces, and also SUMAN, BILLA, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Tourism. Thank you to my guests for joining me on this special telecast. Mr. CHHATWAL, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand why the sector is important and where things stand as of today.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira. I think the sector is becoming more and more important after India has crossed 75 years post-independence. It could not have been important in 1947 as it was a poor nation. It had become independent. It had other challenges of providing lives and livelihoods. But when you move from almost nowhere to fifth largest economy of the world, slated to be fourth next year and maybe third by 2030, then sectors like tourism, hospitality, etc., they turn from a consumption even into a need sector. So beyond your wonderful introduction about all the wonderful places and all the great things one can do in India, I would call the sector also as a fundamental human need, because when you travel, whether for business or for leisure, you need a place to stay. And with all the spend and infrastructure improvement that is going on in the country, it is fundamental need that has to be satisfied. It is a sector that is contributing significantly post-COVID to the growth of GDP. It's a sector like none other that is the highest multiplicator of jobs in a country which has a demographic dividend and needs jobs. And more importantly, the skilling needed in the sector to get jobs is not a very long period of time. You can achieve that from 3 to 9 months for the basic jobs in this sector. So both in the organized and unfortunately a lot of this happens in the unorganized sector is difficult to count, but I think over time people have accepted the fact that tourism and hospitality is the highest multiplicator of jobs across the globe.
Absolutely. All right. Let me take what you're saying to Mr. BILLA as well and hear his thoughts on this particular aspect. What is the state of tourism in India? Because there have been several reports in the recent past which have suggested that several of the other tourist destinations are a challenge to India. What is the scenario right now?
So I think if you look at it dispassionately and if you look at how India has performed over the past 10 years in terms of tourism, I think we've done reasonably well. Could we have done better? Probably yes, and most definitely yes. I think we could have done better. So I think by all accounts, if you look at how we've fared in the past 10 years, I think we've done reasonably well in terms of benchmark standards. But if you ask the question on could we have done better, I think we should. And I think as a nation, what is it that we should be looking at? I think we should try to make tourism add at least 25 million jobs in the next 5 years. And I think in the next 10 years, we should try and double tourism's contribution to the GDP from 5% to 10%, because a country like India, the global average is about 10%. And there is no reason why we should be doing it about 5%. I think we can certainly do much better than this.
That's a good target for us to have, 25 million jobs, and also try and double, tourism's contribution to the GDP is concerned. This is where I'd like to bring you in once again, Mr. CHHATWAL. Let's talk about, job creation really as far as tourism is concerned. How can it contribute towards jobs and the GDP as a whole, something that you mentioned in your opening remark as well. And how can the industry help in this regard, and how is it coping to the changing times?
Now, when it comes to job creation, your question, I think the jobs will get created because there is a direct impact and indirect impact. So if Banaras as a city is booming, you not only are adding hotels. So I represent Taj. We're doubling the size of Taj Ganges. The 100-room block will just open in another 12 months or so, which is add on to the current existing block. We have increased the size of Nadesar Palace, and we are also now going to add luxury tents on the grounds of Nadesar Palace. We are adding 3-4 other properties under other brands in the greater area of Banaras because the demand is very, very high on the spiritual side. So that brings in jobs at the hotel level, but so many people visiting Kashi Vishwanath temple with all the efforts that the government has done to, improve the ghats and the situation, the employment for a rickshawala who takes the foreigners in the rickshaw from the temple to other places in the city, that contribution is significant. You can take that same with all the opening up of Kashmir, and a lot of people going to Srinagar, and the shikarawala on the Dal Lake is also getting employed through the improvement in the tourism infrastructure of the state. So all in all, I think one of the key things that will help grow this sector, I have said it consistently over several years, is the positioning of the sector. The sector is not asking for any money, but if we position the sector as infrastructure without any caps at the center level, which was done also 10, 12 years ago for whatever reasons that were relevant at that point of time, as an industry status in all the states, as tourism for a lot of reasons is still a very strong state subject only. And in an ideal world, get it included in the concurrent list of the constitution, then a lot of things will start happening on their own. So I think the time is right, the positioning is right, the sector is booming, especially on the domestic front, as Mr. Billa said, with the amount of domestic events happening. Look at Mahakumbh. What is happening around Mahakumbh is probably the largest event for year 2025 in the world. So I think there is a lot that is happening, and there is a lot that can be done. But one of the main things would be the positioning of the sector in the kind of a policy making aspect, and the rest would just be a consequence of it.
All right. So at a policy level, the sector requires an impetus. The potential is immense, and the positioning is something that we need to take care of, is what Mr. CHHATWAL is suggesting. Would you want to respond to that, Mr. Billa? And then another aspect that I'd like to bring in as well, some of the other new age challenges that we are possibly facing that we need to address.
The Indian economy is taking off. So the demand side is really picking up. I think the supply side is not keeping up. And especially when you look at how the other sectors have done, I think tourism sector has been trailing a little bit. And the question about the infrastructure status is typically, what does infrastructure status do? Basically today, if you want to build a hotel, you will be approaching for a loan under the real estate category. So if you're an infra category, you will probably get the loan at probably 2% less. And your repayment period goes up to about 15%. So that door is open today, but it is limited to those 3-star hotels and above, and those that are built in cities with a population of less than 1 million. So one idea is to see as to how we can expand it so that we create that impetus. The second, I think, is more importantly, how do we get the states into the game, and how do we sort of ensure that states give the right policy framework in terms of, today there are 56 licenses that a hotel needs to take to set up shop, and each of them takes about 60 days on an average. So how do we ensure that we streamline this, we reduce the number of licenses that are required, and how do we also ensure that they are done in a sort of time bound manner? So I think that is something that we need to take up as part of ease of doing business, and I'm sure that over the next couple of years we will see a lot of action on straightening this out. But if you look at the absolute capacity today, it is a given fact that demand far outstrips supply. And which is why we see a lot of people traveling abroad, because it is also cheaper. And also because demand is higher than supply, the hotel rates tend to be also much higher than what several of our competing destinations offer, as you started when you sorted. So I think this is an issue where we have. So I think we need to increase demand. We need to ensure that our destinations are world class to really be able to compete with the best that there are in the world and still be able to attract. India has a lot that is going for it. India has a lot of potential. In fact, the problem that India has is that we have a problem of plenty. As you mentioned, that how many products do you see? I used to be at the head of Kerala Tourism for several years. There are only 4 things we sell: beaches, backwaters, hill stations and Ayurveda. When you talk about India, the list is very long, and the more you compile it, the longer it gets. So is it possible for you to go and meaningfully and cogently promote all of these? And therefore, I think we need to have a little bit more nuanced way of how we communicate what India is all about. And I think the states need to come out and play. They need to position themselves. They need to really take entrepreneurial position, as it were, and recognize that tourism can be a major enabler and an engine for growth. And therefore, how do they sort of make sure that investments come in, and how do they also make sure that they promote themselves in a way that they are able to attract what goes around in the world. So on international arrivals, again, when we slice and dice it, the numbers still look good. But it's a fact that most of it is happening on business travel, and leisure travel could do better, especially in the past couple of years.
Well, we've identified the areas, and I'm sure a lot is being done to try and ensure that we truly see the potential and meet the potential that we have, because the potential is huge. Mr. CHHATWAL, let me bring you into the picture once again and try and understand really, as far as industry is concerned, how is it changing with the times, what is being done, and what more is in the pipeline for the industry.
Well, the industry is changing like any other industry. It is continuously evolving, and the branded supply, for example, taking on from what Mr. BILLA had mentioned about the demand outpacing supply and the occupancies being high and the rates, which eventually leads to high rates, is something very good, because we have a good balance today. The rates had been stagnating for almost 8-10 years for the same reason, that the supply was outpacing the demand. And I think all in all, we are very blessed, and a lot of new destinations are being opened. Definitely our company is at the forefront of it. As we speak, we just catered in the island of Bangaram for the official visit of the government, and also we are building the 2 islands of Soheli and Kadmat. We are going on very strongly in the northeast. We opened last year a hotel at the border, which we say is the entry point now, the first place of entry in Tawang in Arunachal. So from going on from north in Srinagar to south in Kanyakumari to all the way to Tawang or the coast of Gujarat, we have taken over properties in Diu, and are very happy to contribute in our capacity in whatever we can do to promote the infrastructure. But I think institutionalized process, as outlined in detail by Mr. BILLA, would help, because what was done 10-12 years ago, as I said earlier, was maybe relevant at that point of time. And we don't need just the states. Of course, states have to play an important role. I also agree to that. But the positioning of the sector also has to come from a center level. And we also need to promote India as a destination. Each state cannot start going and promoting India in their own way and form. So they should, but still there should be something like Mr. BILLA or his predecessors have done, making God's own country for Kerala, but also a campaign for India called the Incredible India campaign. That was not a state level campaign. So I think there is some kind of a push that is needed, and that would help on the leisure side. The business segment, as he rightly said, is happening on its own as India gains more and more importance, more and more better positioning as a business destination. So that part is happening and will continue to happen.
Right. All right. So since we are here, Mr. BILLA, let's talk about this aspect as well. What are some of the schemes and policies, that we have launched and that you would like to see in the near future to give tourism the fillip that it requires?
Okay. So I think broadly, if you look at what needs to be done, I think the first is developing infrastructure. So one is the private infrastructure, but private infrastructure will also come where there is public infrastructure. Like one of the things that we need to realize now is that most of our destinations are already more or less saturated. If you take the case of hill stations during summer months, I think there are more people than they can profitably accommodate. So the quality of the experience drops for the tourist as well as for the local community which lives there. So I think we need to start looking at carrying capacity norms, and we need to realize that in the existing destinations, the headroom for you to add meaningful capacity is going to be limited, which means that we have to start planning for new destinations, which will be greenfield destinations in India in several places today as we go forward from now. Second is, along with that, we need to get private investments into place. So one of the things that the government has been doing rather successfully over the past 10 years is that we've had the Swadesh Darshan scheme for developing circuits, we've had the Prasad scheme for pilgrimage, because that's pilgrimage numbers are mind-boggling, but the tourist experience is poor. How do we meaningfully do something to improve the experience there? And recently, under the special assistance to states for capital investment, we have sanctioned projects worth 3,400 crores for the states to build this public infrastructure. So over the past 10 years, I think we have spent close to 10,000 crores in public infrastructure. But I think what we need to do now, having grown, I think a couple of things. The first is, I think we need to start thinking world class, because there's a lot of things that in the past 10 years that we have learned, and I think now we need to sort of see as to how we can create world-class destinations. As Mr. CHHATWAL said when he started, money is not the issue. I think what the nation needs really is an inspiration to say that how can we create world-class products in India that will sort of stand on their own in the global landscape. The second is, how do we bring stronger linkages between public infrastructure and private infrastructure so that investments go hand in hand, and we are able to do that. So I think that part we have done well. The second thing that we need to do is to promote India as a destination, and I think that is something after COVID, that is something that we need to pick up now. I think the world has truly opened up and we need to go, and I fully agree that we need to have an Incredible India campaign which should really open the doors to the world. And I think in its wake, the states can go and market themselves. Typically, like Madhya Pradesh would say, the heart of Incredible India. There's an Incredible India campaign which leads the way, which piques that interest, and then Madhya Pradesh goes and says, I'm the heart of Incredible India and this is what I offer. And then at the third level, the industry can go and market itself. So I think we need to connect the dots. We need to create a proper game plan between the government of India and the states and the industry. And I'm hopeful that in the next fiscal, we are going to see a lot of play on that. And the third is, of course, jobs, because India has a very large pool of people who are looking for jobs, and the hospitality industry is an area which wants people who will be able to do. And you don't require great training skills, and hospitality is one segment in tourism where people at all levels can work, from an MBA to people who have done very high educational attainment to those who are barely skilled can actually work in tourism. So you are able to create jobs all along the value chain. I think the challenge really for us is how do we build this bridge to create those skills within the community to sort of support. And I think tourism and the hospitality industry should go beyond creating jobs on how to interlink the ecosystem, the economic ecosystem within the communities in which they reside, so that it becomes a source of sustenance for the communities.
So the future is bright. The dots are all there. All that needs to be done is connecting the dots, and then we'll be in a good place. All right, Mr. CHHATWAL, this is a pre-budget special at the end of the day, so I'd like to get your thoughts and your expectations really from the budget. What do you expect?
Well, Mr. Pere, firstly, I think we should compliment the government on building millions of square kilometers of highways, in the renaissance of the train stations, in the plan to double the number of airports that we have. And many of those airports today, when you travel across India, are much nicer than the ones in the Western world. I think both Mr. BILLA and I have had the experience of using several of those in the Western part of the world. And I think that is a prerequisite for tourism to flourish or thrive. And I think the biggest beneficiary of the infrastructure development is not just the companies building the infrastructure, but it is really tourism and hospitality, and the connectivity that I have recently seen. Jaipur Ranthambore or Savai Madhopur is, absolutely world class. And if that is world class, you can build hotels which are world class destinations, because There's no point if the infrastructure is not great and you come to a great resort, by the time you reach there, you've lost all interest. So I think this is very important. And I think from a national perspective, and not wearing just the hospitality industry hat, I would say the tourism hat, I think continuous spend in infrastructure is the key. And as I've said already, positioning of the sector, whether it gives a little bit of moratorium or it gives a cheaper loan, I think it all helps because it is aligned to the strategy of the government, because all that is also joining the dots, as you said, in terms of development of a complete infrastructure, end-to-end solution. And finally, as I said, to spend some money on international marketing. Everything is not just jobs and GDP and economic value. I think the soft power of tourism to elevate further the positioning of India, as Mr. Billa said, from whatever Kerala has to offer to whatever Kashmir has to offer, from spirituality to all the religions in India, to all the historical side, to the largest sea mass, the beautiful mountain ranges. I think there is a potential that we are sitting on that needs to be capitalized upon. I leave it more to the policymakers to see, because a nation has a lot of needs and wants. Every sector has a lot of needs and wants. And I'm sure whatever will come up will be for the benefit of the nation at large. And if their tourism happens to be a bit of a beneficiary for a change, we would be very pleased with it.
All right. And Mr. Billa, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well, and let you have the last say on the program.
I think we are in a very unique position. And if you look at, just like Mr. CHHATWAL said, there's a lot of infrastructure that is built up. All of us read in the papers that there's going to be 1,000 aircrafts that's going to be added to the Indian fleet. So people are going to be traveling somewhere. People are going to be coming in and people are going to be going out. So I think from a broader economy perspective, I think we've ticked many boxes now. We've got great roads, we've got great airports, there's a lot of seats in the air that are coming up. So I think it is inevitable that tourism will grow. And I think the challenge that we have is how do we sort of create the right incentives for the industry to kickstart it. And I think we're in a great place, great position to be in. And I think the future augurs exceptionally well. And as a public servant, I don't think I should be speculating on what is going to be coming in the budget, but
Absolutely
I think
not,
it looks
yes.
good.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's tourism potential. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, what's coming out of this discussion is that there's tremendous potential as far as India's tourism is concerned. All we need to do is connect the dots. India is in a good place, and from here, we are only going to go upwards. That's it from me. See you again next time.